The difference between an ordinary day and the day that changes your life is often just a single heartbeat. The ceramic coffee cup slipped from tiny fingers and shattered against the polished cafe floor with a sharp crack that silenced every conversation in the room. 8-year-old Sophie Walker swayed beside her chair, her face suddenly drained of color as her father reached toward her in confusion. "Sophie." Ethan Walker's voice carried none of the confidence that had built one of America's largest technology empires. It carried only fear. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the little girl collapsed. A chair scraped backward. Someone gasped. A customer fumbled for a phone with trembling hands. Another shouted for someone to call 911. The warm aroma of fresh coffee seemed to vanish beneath the heavy weight of panic. Time slowed, stretching every second into something painfully long. And then, almost as if the entire world had forgotten how to move, one person quietly stepped forward. Claire Bennett had been carrying a tray with 2 cappuccinos and a blueberry muffin only moments earlier. She gently placed it on the nearest empty table without spilling a single drop. Her breathing remained steady. Her expression never changed. While frightened voices echoed through the cafe, she focused only on the child lying motionless on the floor. Ethan dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his expensive suit forgotten as he reached for her hand. "Somebody help her," he pleaded, looking desperately from one stranger to another. Several customers surrounded them but froze, uncertain, afraid of making the wrong decision. Claire crossed the room with calm, measured steps that somehow cut through the chaos. "Please give her some space," she said softly. Her voice was never loud, yet everyone heard it. People instinctively stepped aside. Something about her quiet confidence made them listen. Ethan looked up, barely noticing the simple black apron she wore or the name tag pinned above her heart. To him, she was only another waitress. Another employee caught in a terrible moment. "Can you do something?" he asked, his voice breaking. Claire knelt beside Sophie, her eyes studying the little girl's face with careful attention. She noticed details no one else had seen. A half-finished fruit smoothie on the table. Tiny fingertips still curled around a paper straw. A faint line of moisture near the corner of Sophie's lips. She rested 2 fingers gently near the child's neck, counting silently while the entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. Around them, sirens still had not arrived. Coffee machines hissed in the background. A clock above the pastry display continued its steady ticking, indifferent to human fear. Claire closed her eyes for only a fraction of a second, as though organizing every thought with perfect clarity. Then she opened them again, calm as ever. "Mr. Walker," she said quietly, somehow already knowing his name. "I need you to trust me." Ethan stared at the young waitress in disbelief. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, faced hostile boardrooms, and made impossible decisions under relentless pressure. Yet in that moment, surrounded by strangers inside an ordinary neighborhood cafe, the future of everything he loved rested in the hands of a shy waitress no one had truly noticed until now. 30 minutes earlier, neither of them knew the other existed. 30 minutes earlier, the morning had unfolded with the comforting rhythm that made Harbor Street Cafe feel untouched by the relentless pace of Manhattan. Sunlight filtered through tall front windows, painting warm patterns across polished wooden tables, while the rich scent of freshly roasted coffee drifted through the room. Claire Bennett tied the strings of her black apron behind her back with the same quiet precision she brought to every shift. She greeted each customer with a gentle smile, remembered regular orders without writing them down, and moved through the dining room with calm efficiency that made difficult work appear effortless. To most people, she was simply another shy waitress earning an honest living. No one noticed how carefully she observed every detail around her. No one wondered why she always seemed to recognize when someone needed help before they asked. At exactly 11:35, the familiar sound of expensive tires rolling across the brick street outside drew several curious glances toward the window. A dark luxury sedan stopped beside the cafe entrance. Ethan Walker stepped out first, adjusting the sleeve of his navy jacket before walking around to open the passenger door himself. His daughter jumped onto the sidewalk with a bright smile, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she looked up at him. "Do we really have time for hot chocolate today?" she asked hopefully. Ethan smiled in a way that very few people ever witnessed. In boardrooms, his expression was measured and controlled. Around Sophie, it softened completely. I promised you, did not I? He replied. 1 hour belongs only to us before my afternoon meetings. Sophie slipped her hand into his as they walked inside together. Several customers recognized the billionaire immediately, whispering his name beneath their breath, but Ethan barely noticed. Public attention had become background noise years ago. Sophie, however, greeted everyone with innocent curiosity, smiling at an elderly couple by the window before admiring the colorful display of pastries behind the counter. Claire looked up just long enough to welcome them. Good morning. You may choose any table you like. Ethan nodded politely. Thank you. It was a simple exchange lasting only seconds. Yet Claire quietly noticed the faint shadows beneath Sophie's bright blue eyes and the way the little girl rubbed one temple before forcing another cheerful smile toward her father. She also noticed Ethan checking his watch twice before they even sat down, not from impatience, but from the constant pressure of a life scheduled down to the minute. Sophie climbed into a chair beside the window instead of across from him. Can we stay here? I like watching people walk by. Of course, Ethan answered, placing his phone face down on the table without hesitation. During business lunches, it never left his hand. During time with Sophie, it remained untouched. Claire approached with 2 menus and a glass of water. Sophie thanked her before opening the menu with genuine excitement. The blueberry pancakes again? Ethan asked. Sophie laughed softly. You already know my order. Claire smiled almost invisibly as she wrote it down. Father and daughter continued talking about school, piano lessons, and a science project involving the solar system. For a few peaceful minutes, they looked like every other family enjoying an ordinary morning, completely unaware that before the next half hour had passed, every life inside that quiet little cafe would change forever. Claire carried on with her work as though the morning held nothing unusual, yet her attention never drifted far from the table by the window. She had developed that habit years ago without realizing it. Some people noticed raised voices. Others noticed expensive clothes or famous faces. Claire noticed small changes that most people overlooked. Sophie laughed at something her father said, but the smile faded almost as quickly as it appeared. She reached for her glass of water instead of the hot chocolate she had begged for only minutes earlier. Her shoulders relaxed for a moment before tightening again. Claire quietly placed another order on a nearby table while keeping Sophie within the corner of her vision. Across the room, Ethan was completely focused on his daughter. That hour belonged only to her, just as he had promised. He listened carefully while she described her science presentation about the planets, asking questions that made her eyes brighten again. For a little, while the weight of billion-dollar decisions disappeared from his face, he was no longer the man whose photograph appeared on magazine covers. He was simply a father trying to give his daughter the childhood she deserved. Claire could not hear every word, but she noticed something else. Sophie rubbed the side of her neck before taking another small sip from her drink. She blinked twice, as if trying to clear her vision, then smiled again so her father would not worry. Children often hid discomfort to protect the people they loved. Claire had learned that lesson long ago. She walked toward the pastry display where another employee was arranging fresh muffins. Can you cover table 6 for a minute? Claire asked quietly. Her coworker looked surprised. Everything all right? Claire offered a gentle nod. Probably. I just want to keep an eye on the little girl by the window. Her coworker glanced toward Ethan's table and shrugged. She looks fine to me. Claire hoped she was right. She truly did. Still, something deep inside refused to settle. It was never one obvious sign that concerned her. It was several tiny details quietly fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. The unusual tiredness around Sophie's eyes. The way she stopped eating after only a few bites. The slower rhythm of her breathing compared with only minutes earlier. None of those things alone meant danger. Together, they made Claire pause. Outside, pedestrians hurried along the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags and briefcases beneath a bright autumn sky. Inside, soft piano music floated through hidden speakers, while the espresso machine released another cloud of fragrant steam. Everything looked peaceful. Everything sounded ordinary. Yet Claire found herself wiping the same clean countertop twice without realizing it. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed a small wrapped gift from the inside pocket. Sophie's face lit up with genuine excitement. You remembered. I told you I would, he said warmly. Congratulations on earning first place at the school science fair. Sophie hugged the small box against her chest before opening it carefully. Inside rested a silver charm shaped like a tiny telescope. Her eyes filled with quiet happiness. "Thank you, Dad." Claire smiled to herself before turning away to refill fresh coffee for another customer. She wanted to believe the uneasy feeling would disappear. Instead, just as she picked up a serving tray, she heard the unmistakable sound of ceramic striking the floor behind her. The tray slipped from Claire's hands before she even realized she had stopped walking. A porcelain cup struck the floor with a bright, echoing crack that turned every head in the cafe. Sophie's fingers loosened around the small silver telescope charm. The little keepsake landed softly on the tabletop before rolling to a stop beside her untouched pancakes. Ethan's smile disappeared instantly. "Sophie?" he asked, leaning forward. She opened her mouth as if to answer, but no words came. Her eyes searched for her father, confused more than frightened, and then her shoulders sagged. The room seemed to lose every sound except the slow ticking of the wall clock. A woman near the entrance covered her mouth. A businessman stood halfway from his chair without knowing what to do next. Someone reached for a telephone with shaking hands. Ethan was already beside his daughter before the chair had fully fallen backward. "Look at me, sweetheart. Stay with me." His voice trembled despite every attempt to steady it. Sophie did not answer. Panic spread through the cafe faster than spilled coffee across polished wood. "Call 911, one customer shouted. Another suggested getting water. A third began searching the internet for emergency instructions, scrolling so quickly that the screen blurred beneath nervous fingers. Everyone wanted to help. No one knew how. Claire had already crossed half the room. She did not run. She did not panic. She simply moved with quiet purpose, every step deliberate, every breath controlled. Her calm stood in sharp contrast to the fear surrounding her. She gently placed one hand between two anxious customers. "Please give her room to breathe," she said. There was no command in her voice, yet people instinctively stepped back. Ethan looked up at her with desperate eyes. "Please," he whispered, "help my little girl." Claire knelt beside Sophie and focused entirely on the child. She noticed details others missed. The faint sweetness lingering in the air from the fruit smoothie. The untouched hot chocolate slowly cooling beside the plate. The slight tension in Sophie's shoulders. The subtle rhythm of her breathing. Claire did not rush. She observed first. She listened. She rested two fingers gently against the side of Sophie's neck while silently counting. Her eyes remained calm, never leaving the little girl's face. Around them the cafe had become strangely quiet. Even the espresso machine had finished its cycle, leaving only distant traffic outside and the steady hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Ethan searched Claire's expression for answers, but she revealed nothing except careful concentration. Seconds felt like minutes. Finally, Claire looked toward the cafe manager. "Please unlock the front entrance completely. The ambulance crew will need a clear path." The manager nodded without hesitation and hurried away. Claire turned to another employee. "Bring me the first aid kit, but do not open it yet." Again, no one questioned her. Ethan swallowed hard. "Have you done this before?" Claire met his eyes for only a moment. "Right now your daughter needs everyone here to stay calm." She looked back at Sophie, gently adjusted the child's position, and took one slow breath herself before placing her hands with remarkable confidence, as though every movement had been practiced long before this ordinary morning ever began. Claire did not reach for the first aid kit. She did not ask for water. She did not waste a single second doing what frightened crowds expected someone to do. Instead, she kept her attention fixed on Sophie, watching every small movement with remarkable patience. Her fingers remained lightly against the little girl's neck for another moment before she gently lifted Sophie's chin only enough to help her breathe more comfortably. "Good," she whispered, almost to herself. "Stay with me." Ethan could barely breathe. Every instinct told him to do something, anything, but the quiet certainty in Claire's voice stopped him. "Tell me what I can do," he pleaded. Claire looked at him without panic. "Keep talking to her. Let her hear your voice." Ethan immediately leaned closer. "Sophie, sweetheart, it is Dad. I am right here. You are not alone. Do you remember what we planned after lunch? We were going to visit the bookstore. You still have to help me choose my next adventure novel." His words were calm, even though tears threatened to break through. Claire noticed the faint movement of Sophie's eyelids. It was subtle, almost impossible to see, but it was there. She carefully adjusted the little girl's position by only a few inches, supporting her shoulders with one hand while ensuring her airway remained clear. Every motion was gentle and deliberate. A customer standing nearby whispered, "How does a waitress know exactly what to do?" No one answered. Another customer quietly lowered the phone that had been recording the scene, realizing that this moment deserved respect rather than attention. The cafe manager returned carrying the first aid kit. Claire accepted it with a grateful nod, but left it closed on the floor beside her. "Not yet," she said softly. "Right now observation is more important." The manager stared at her with growing amazement. Ethan noticed it as well. This was not guesswork. This was someone following a process with confidence built over countless hours of learning. Outside, the distant sound of approaching sirens finally floated through the autumn air, still several blocks away. Claire glanced briefly toward the front window, silently estimating the time. "They are coming," Ethan said hopefully. Claire nodded once. "Yes, we just need to help Sophie until they arrive." She spoke with the reassuring tone of someone who refused to surrender to fear. Sophie took another slow breath. Her fingers twitched slightly against the floor. Ethan saw it immediately. "Claire," she moved. Claire offered the smallest smile. "That is a good sign." She continued speaking directly to Sophie in a calm, steady rhythm. "You are doing well. There is no rush. Just keep breathing one breath at a time." The words seemed almost ordinary, yet they filled the room with unexpected hope. The customers who had been whispering only moments earlier now stood in complete silence. Even strangers who had never met Sophie found themselves quietly willing the little girl to open her eyes. Ethan looked at Claire with growing disbelief. He had spent years surrounded by world-class consultants, elite specialists, and experts whose confidence often came with pride. The young woman kneeling beside his daughter carried none of that. She asked for no recognition. She made no dramatic promises. She simply remained present, calm, and unwavering. For the first time since the terrifying moment had begun, Ethan felt something stronger than fear. He felt trust, even though he still knew absolutely nothing about the quiet waitress who somehow seemed to understand exactly what his daughter needed. The distant sirens grew louder with every passing second, yet inside the cafe time still seemed to move according to Claire's quiet rhythm instead of the world outside. She kept one hand gently supporting Sophie's shoulder while watching every breath with unwavering attention. Nothing about her movements appeared rushed. Every decision seemed measured, thoughtful, and purposeful. Ethan remained beside his daughter exactly as Claire had instructed, speaking softly about familiar places, favorite books, and the small traditions they never missed together. "We still have that telescope to try tonight," he whispered. "The weather report said the sky will be clear. You promised you would show me Saturn again." Claire noticed the smallest change. Sophie's breathing became slightly more regular. The tightness around her forehead eased. Her fingers curled weakly around the tiny silver telescope charm resting beside her hand. "Very good," Claire said gently. "Keep listening to your father." A faint sound escaped Sophie's lips. It was barely louder than a whisper, but Ethan heard it immediately. His eyes filled with hopeful tears. "She is trying to answer." Claire nodded without taking her attention away from the child. "She is responding. Stay calm." The words spread through the room like a quiet wave of relief. Customers who had been holding their breath finally exhaled. Someone near the entrance silently lowered their head in gratitude. The cafe manager stood frozen beside the counter, amazed that the young employee who usually served coffee with a shy smile now carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced difficult moments before. The first emergency medical technicians entered through the open front door, carrying their equipment with practiced speed. One of them immediately approached Claire. "Tell us what you have observed." Claire answered clearly and calmly, describing the sequence of events, the changes she had noticed, and the steps she had already taken. She spoke without exaggeration, using simple, precise language that allowed the team to understand the situation within seconds. The lead technician looked at her with brief surprise before nodding in appreciation. "Thank you. That information helps." As they continued their assessment, Claire quietly stepped back to give them room. Ethan reached toward her before she could disappear into the background. "Please do not leave." His voice carried sincere gratitude instead of authority. Claire offered a reassuring smile. "They are with her now." Almost on cue, Sophie's eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes searched the room for only a moment before settling on her father's face. "Dad," she whispered softly. Ethan let out a shaky breath that seemed to release the weight of the entire morning. He gently held her hand, careful not to interfere with the medical team. "I am right here, sweetheart." Sophie managed the faintest smile. "Did I scare you?" Ethan laughed through grateful tears. "More than you will ever know." Several customers quietly wiped away tears of their own. The atmosphere that only minutes earlier had been filled with fear was now wrapped in profound relief. Claire watched from a respectful distance, saying nothing. She did not wait for applause. She did not seek attention. She simply picked up the first aid kit she had barely touched and closed it carefully before placing it back on the counter. As she turned to return to her unfinished shift, the lead technician glanced after her with unmistakable curiosity. There was something about the quiet waitress that did not fit the simple black apron she wore, and before the morning was over, that question would begin changing far more lives than anyone inside the cafe could possibly imagine. The emergency team carefully prepared Sophie for the short trip to the nearby children's hospital while the atmosphere inside the cafe slowly returned to life. Conversations remained hushed, as though everyone feared speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile peace that had finally settled over the room. Ethan never let go of his daughter's hand. Every few seconds, Sophie squeezed his fingers gently, reassuring him with a small smile that she was still there. Before the paramedics guided the stretcher toward the waiting ambulance, Sophie looked across the cafe until her eyes found Claire standing quietly behind the counter, wiping up the last traces of the spilled coffee as though it were the only unfinished task that mattered. "Dad," Sophie whispered. Ethan leaned closer. "Yes, sweetheart. The nice waitress helped me." Ethan followed her gaze. Claire looked up only briefly before offering the little girl a warm, reassuring smile. Sophie lifted the tiny silver telescope charm from her blanket and held it toward Claire. "Thank you." Claire walked over with calm, unhurried steps. She gently closed Sophie's fingers around the charm again. "Keep this with you," she said softly. "I think it still has many stars left to discover." Sophie smiled a little wider. "I will." The ambulance crew began moving again. Ethan quickly reached into his jacket and removed a sleek black business card embossed with nothing more than his name and a private telephone number. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice filled with sincere gratitude. "Please take this. I do not know how I can ever repay what you did today, but I would like the chance to try." Claire looked at the card for only a second before gently pushing his hand back toward him. "Your daughter is awake. That is enough for me." Ethan frowned slightly, surprised that anyone could refuse him so naturally. "Please, at least let me thank you properly." Claire shook her head with the same quiet kindness she had shown all morning. "Spend today with Sophie. That is where you are needed." The words landed with unexpected weight. For perhaps the first time in years, no one standing before Ethan Walker cared about his wealth, his influence, or the opportunities he could provide. Claire cared only that a frightened little girl felt safe beside her father. The lead paramedic glanced toward Claire before stepping outside. "You handled yourself very well," he said respectfully. "Where did you receive your training?" Claire hesitated for the briefest moment before offering a polite smile. Life teaches many lessons. It was not an answer, yet it somehow ended the conversation. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the distance, Ethan remained standing on the sidewalk for one final moment, looking back through the cafe window. Claire had already returned to clearing empty tables. She quietly gathered broken pieces of porcelain, replaced fresh silverware, and welcomed a new customer with the very same gentle smile she had worn before the morning changed forever. To everyone else, she looked exactly like the shy waitress they had always known. To Ethan, she had become the greatest mystery he had encountered in years. He slipped the untouched business card back into his pocket, realizing that despite everything he had built and everything he believed he understood about people, he did not even know the first chapter of Claire Bennett's story. Late that afternoon, the waiting room at St. Andrew Children's Hospital was unusually quiet. Sunlight stretched across the polished floor while nurses moved calmly through the corridors, speaking in gentle voices that somehow made anxious families breathe a little easier. Ethan sat beside Sophie's bed after doctors assured him that she was stable and expected to make a full recovery. Relief had finally replaced panic, yet one question refused to leave his mind. He had replayed every second inside the cafe countless times. Claire had not hesitated. She had not guessed. Every movement had reflected knowledge built through experience rather than luck. The attending physician entered carrying a tablet before offering Ethan a reassuring smile. Your daughter is doing very well. We would like to keep her under observation until tomorrow morning, but everything looks encouraging. Ethan nodded gratefully. Doctor, may I ask you something? Of course. The young waitress who helped Sophie before your team arrived. You reviewed everything she did. Was it appropriate? The physician smiled thoughtfully. More than appropriate. She remained calm, protected your daughter's airway, observed instead of rushing into unnecessary actions, and gave our team an accurate report the moment we arrived. That kind of composure is uncommon. Ethan looked toward the window, thoughtful. She said almost nothing, yet somehow everyone listened. The physician folded his arms. Confidence is not always loud. Those 4 words remained with Ethan long after the doctor left the room. Across the city, Claire finished her shift exactly as she always did. She thanked the cafe manager, folded her apron neatly into her locker, changed into a simple gray sweater, and walked toward the subway station carrying nothing except a worn canvas bag. Her coworkers could not stop talking about the morning. Claire, the entire neighborhood is calling you a hero, one waitress said excitedly. Claire simply smiled. The paramedics and doctors deserve the credit. That is not what everyone saw. Claire quietly shook her head before stepping outside into the cool evening air. She preferred silence over praise. She had learned long ago that recognition rarely changed what truly mattered. Back at the hospital, Ethan stood beside the large window overlooking the city lights. His assistant Daniel arrived carrying a folder and a laptop after canceling every remaining business meeting. The board understands, Daniel said. Everyone is asking about Sophie. Tell them she is improving. Ethan remained silent for another moment before speaking again. Daniel, I need you to find someone. His assistant immediately opened the laptop. Who? Claire Bennett. She works at Harbor Street Café. Daniel typed quickly. That should not take long. Ethan slowly shook his head. No. Do not invade her privacy. Do not pressure anyone. I only want to understand who she is. Daniel looked slightly surprised. You usually request complete background reports. Not this time. Ethan remembered the way Claire had refused his business card without the slightest hesitation. She had not been impressed by his name. She had not expected anything in return. That alone made her unlike almost anyone he had met in years. As Daniel quietly began searching public records, one result after another appeared with almost nothing attached to Claire Bennett beyond ordinary employment information. No professional licenses. No remarkable achievements. No public interviews. No explanation for the extraordinary confidence Ethan had witnessed with his own eyes. The screen displayed a life that looked completely ordinary, yet Ethan knew with absolute certainty that somewhere behind those simple facts rested a story no database could possibly explain. The following morning, sunlight poured through the hospital window as Sophie sat upright in bed, coloring planets around the tiny silver telescope charm that never left her bedside table. Her laughter had returned, soft but genuine, filling the room with the sound Ethan had feared he might never hear again. Every few minutes, he looked up from his chair simply to reassure himself that she was truly smiling. Gratitude settled deeply within him, yet so did curiosity. After Sophie drifted into a short afternoon nap, Ethan quietly stepped into the hallway, where Daniel was already waiting with a slim folder in his hands. I found everything that can legally be found, Daniel said. Ethan opened the folder expecting answers. Instead, he found almost nothing. Claire Bennett, 26 years old. Current address in a modest apartment building. Employed at Harbor Street Café for almost 3 years. No disciplinary record. No professional licenses. No public awards. No social media presence beyond an inactive account with photographs of autumn trees and old bookstores. Ethan frowned. That cannot be the whole story. Daniel nodded slowly. I thought the same thing. He slid one additional sheet from the folder. There was one detail that stood out. Ethan looked down. Several years earlier, Claire had been enrolled at Hudson College. The program description was brief, but one phrase immediately caught his attention. Pre-medical studies. His eyes remained fixed on those words. She studied medicine. For 2 years, Daniel replied. Then she withdrew without completing the program. Why? Daniel quietly shook his head. There is no public explanation. Ethan closed the folder and stared through the hospital window toward the Manhattan skyline. Suddenly, every moment inside the cafe made more sense. Yet at the same time, the mystery only grew deeper. Someone who had worked that hard toward becoming a physician did not simply walk away without a reason. Somewhere between those missing years and the quiet waitress serving coffee every morning lay a story no report could explain. Across the city, Claire unlocked the cafe before sunrise as she always did. She switched on the lights, arranged fresh flowers near the entrance, and greeted the baker delivering warm pastries with the same gentle smile she offered everyone. Her manager approached carrying 2 coffee mugs. "You should be celebrating," he said. "People have been calling all morning asking about you." Claire accepted the mug with quiet gratitude. "How is the little girl?" "Her father called earlier. She is recovering well." Claire closed her eyes for the briefest moment, relieved. "That is wonderful." The manager studied her thoughtfully. "Claire, I have worked with you for almost 3 years, and I realized yesterday that I know almost nothing about you." She smiled politely without answering. Some questions were easier to leave untouched. Before the morning rush began, she quietly opened the small locker that held her personal belongings. Resting inside was an old leather notebook worn smooth with age. Tucked between its pages was a faded student identification card from Hudson College. Claire looked at it for only a second before sliding it back into the notebook and closing the locker once more. She did not sigh. She did not dwell on the past. She simply tied her apron, stepped onto the cafe floor, and welcomed the first customer of the day as though yesterday had been no different from any other ordinary shift. 3 days later, Sophie returned home with nothing more than a follow-up appointment and strict instructions to rest. Ethan kept every promise he had made beside her hospital bed. He canceled meetings, ignored interviews, and spent each evening helping her build a cardboard model of the solar system across the dining room floor. Yet no matter how peaceful the house became, his thoughts always returned to the same quiet woman in the black apron. One Friday afternoon, he drove to Harbor Street Café without informing anyone except his driver. He did not arrive with security officers, photographers, or business associates. He carried only a small paper gift bag in the hope of expressing gratitude in person. The cafe looked exactly as it had before. Warm sunlight reflected across polished tables, while the familiar scent of coffee welcomed everyone through the front door. Claire stood behind the counter arranging fresh flowers in a glass vase. When she looked up and recognized Ethan, surprise flickered across her face for only a moment before her calm expression returned. "Good afternoon, Mr. Walker," she said warmly. "How is Sophie?" Ethan smiled for the first time since entering. "She is doing very well. She talks about you every day." Claire's shoulders relaxed with quiet relief. "I am glad to hear that." Ethan ordered a simple cup of black coffee and chose a small table near the window. Claire served him just as she served every other customer, without special treatment or unnecessary attention. Only after the lunch rush ended did she approach his table again. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" Ethan reached for the paper gift bag beside his chair. "Actually, yes. I was hoping you would accept this." Claire looked inside and found a beautifully illustrated astronomy book for children along with a handwritten note from Sophie thanking her for helping her find her way back to the stars. Claire gently traced the little girl's careful handwriting before smiling. "Please tell her I will treasure this." Ethan watched her closely. "There is nothing expensive inside because I remembered what happened to my business card." Claire laughed softly, the first genuine laugh he had heard from her. "Then I can accept it." A comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I learned that you studied pre-medical sciences." Claire did not appear startled. Instead, she looked out the window for a moment before answering. "A long time ago. You would have made an excellent physician." Claire folded her hands together. Life had different plans. Ethan waited, sensing there was more, but he refused to push. After several quiet seconds, Claire continued on her own. "My mother became seriously ill during my second year of college. She needed constant care, and I was the only family she had left. Tuition, medical bills, rent, groceries. There was no way to keep everything going." Her voice remained steady, free from bitterness. "So I left school and found the first full-time job that would let me support us." Ethan lowered his eyes, humbled by the simplicity of her explanation. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire thought carefully before answering. I miss learning. I miss the dream sometimes. But I have never regretted choosing my mother. Ethan realized that the greatest strength sitting across from him was not hidden medical knowledge or remarkable composure. It was a heart that quietly chose people over ambition without ever asking the world for recognition. At that moment, he understood that Claire Bennett had not lost her calling when she left college. She had simply continued living it in a different uniform. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Outside the cafe, the afternoon traffic flowed through Manhattan with its usual urgency, but inside, everything seemed to slow. Ethan looked at Claire with a respect that had nothing to do with admiration for her knowledge anymore. It came from understanding the choices she had made when no one was watching. Most people spent their lives chasing success. Claire had quietly chosen responsibility instead. Ethan finally broke the silence. Claire, I own hospitals, research centers, and scholarship foundations. I cannot change the years you sacrificed, but perhaps I can help you return to what you loved. Claire smiled gently before wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. That is generous. I am serious. Ethan leaned forward. If you want to finish medical school, every expense will be covered. Tuition, books, housing, whatever you need. There would be no contracts, no obligations, and no publicity. Consider it one father thanking the person who gave his daughter another tomorrow. Claire remained silent long enough for the sounds of clinking dishes and quiet conversations to fill the space between them. She appreciated the sincerity behind his words. She believed him completely. Yet her answer did not come quickly because gratitude deserved honesty. My mother passed away last winter, she said softly. Before she died, she asked me for only one promise. Ethan listened without interrupting. She told me never to measure my life by the title on a business card. She said if I could make one frightened person feel safe each day, then I had already lived a meaningful life. Claire glanced around the cafe. An elderly couple shared a slice of pie by the window. A young college student quietly studied beside a notebook. A tired construction worker smiled after taking his first sip of hot coffee. Some people think I settled, she continued. I do not feel that way. I still help people. Only now it happens one conversation, one meal, and sometimes one unexpected morning at a time. Ethan looked around the room as though seeing it differently for the first time. Until then, he had viewed the cafe as an ordinary place. Claire saw it as a place where kindness quietly happened every day. At that moment, the attending physician from St. Andrew Children's Hospital entered through the front door, carrying a small paper bag. He recognized Claire immediately and walked over with a warm smile. I hoped I would find you here. Claire stood to greet him. Dr. Harris, it is nice to see you again. Ethan watched with curiosity as the physician handed Claire the bag. One of our nurses baked these cookies for you. She said she never had the chance to thank you properly. Claire accepted them with visible embarrassment. Please thank her for me. Dr. Harris turned toward Ethan and smiled. Mr. Walker, I should tell you something. After reviewing everything from that day, our entire emergency team reached the same conclusion. The calm decisions Claire made before we arrived gave Sophie the best possible chance to recover comfortably while we were still on the way. She helped create precious time, and in emergency care, time is one gift no one can replace. Ethan slowly looked back at Claire. She lowered her eyes, almost uncomfortable with the praise. In that quiet moment, he realized the greatest heroes rarely announce themselves. They simply did what was right and returned to their ordinary lives before anyone had the chance to call them extraordinary. The conversation with Dr. Harris stayed with Ethan long after he left the cafe. As he walked back onto the busy sidewalk, the city looked strangely different. The towers were just as tall. The traffic was just as loud. Yet something inside him had quietly shifted. For years, he had measured success through quarterly reports, acquisitions, and headlines. Claire had measured it by whether one frightened stranger felt less alone before the day ended. Neither approach had built the same kind of legacy. That evening, Ethan sat in his home office, not reviewing investment proposals, but staring at a blank notebook. On the first page, he wrote a single sentence. What would make help arrive sooner for the next family? The question stayed on the page for several minutes before ideas slowly followed. He called Daniel the next morning. I want to establish a new community emergency education program, he said. Free classes. Every neighborhood. Every family welcome. No publicity campaign centered on me. Make the training practical and accessible. Daniel looked surprised. This was not part of the annual foundation plan. Ethan smiled faintly. It is now. Within weeks, planning had already begun. Hospitals partnered with community centers. Volunteer instructors signed up. Local schools offered classrooms during weekends. Parents, grandparents, teachers, restaurant workers, and college students all registered. Ethan attended the first planning meeting without sitting at the head of the table. He listened more than he spoke. Every decision returned to one simple goal: give ordinary people the confidence to stay calm until professional help arrived. Meanwhile, Claire continued living almost exactly as before. She opened the cafe every morning, greeted regular customers by name, remembered who preferred oat milk instead of cream, and quietly left encouraging notes beside the coffee cups of students studying for final exams. She never mentioned the foundation because she did not know it had begun with a question inspired by her. One rainy afternoon, Sophie walked into the cafe holding her father's hand. She looked healthier than ever, carrying the small telescope charm around her neck on a thin silver chain. The moment she saw Claire, her face brightened. She hurried over and wrapped both arms around the shy waitress in a grateful hug. "I have something to show you," Sophie said excitedly. She opened her backpack and carefully removed a framed certificate from her school science fair. At the bottom, beneath her name, she had written one extra line in careful handwriting. Inspired by someone who stayed calm when everyone else was afraid. Claire looked at the words for a long moment before smiling with quiet pride. "I think you earned this yourself," she said gently. Sophie shook her head. "You helped me remember that brave people do not always wear capes." Ethan watched the exchange without saying a word. He realized Claire had once refused money, recognition, and opportunity, yet somehow she continued changing lives simply by being herself. As father and daughter prepared to leave, Ethan paused beside the cafe door and looked back one last time. Claire was already serving another customer with the same peaceful smile she had offered on every ordinary morning before the world finally noticed what had always been there. 1 year passed almost quietly. Harbor Street Cafe still opened before sunrise. The first aroma of fresh coffee still drifted onto the sidewalk, and Claire Bennett still tied the same black apron around her waist before greeting the first customer with the same gentle smile. To anyone walking through the front door, she looked exactly as she always had. She remembered favorite orders, carried warm plates to waiting tables, and paused long enough to ask elderly regulars how their grandchildren were doing. Nothing about her routine suggested that a single ordinary morning had quietly changed the lives of countless people she would never meet. Across the city, the Community Emergency Education Program had expanded far beyond its original plan. Families filled classrooms every weekend, learning simple skills that replaced panic with confidence. Teachers practiced alongside bus drivers. Restaurant employees learned beside office workers. Parents left carrying not only certificates, but also the reassurance that if an unexpected emergency ever arrived, they would not have to stand frozen in fear. Ethan never attached his own name to the program. Whenever reporters asked where the idea had come from, he simply answered, "From someone who reminded me that calm can save precious time." He never offered another explanation. Some stories belong to the people who live them, not to the headlines that try to summarize them. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sophie asked if they could visit the cafe again after school. She walked inside carrying a small telescope case almost as carefully as she had once carried the silver charm around her neck. Claire looked up from arranging fresh flowers and smiled immediately. "Planning another night of stargazing?" Sophie nodded excitedly. "Dad and I found Saturn again last weekend, and this time I could even see the rings." Claire's eyes brightened with genuine happiness. "Then your promise came true." Ethan stood quietly beside his daughter, watching the simple conversation unfold. There was no ceremony, no public recognition, no photographers waiting outside. The greatest moment of gratitude happened in complete silence. Before leaving, Sophie placed a folded envelope on the counter. "This is for you," she said. Claire opened it only after they had walked outside. Inside was a child's drawing of 3 people standing beneath a sky filled with stars. At the bottom, Sophie had written, "Kind people help us find our way home." Claire carefully folded the picture again and placed it inside the old leather notebook that still rested in her locker beside the faded student identification card from years before. Some memories reminded people of dreams they had left behind. Others reminded them that those dreams had never truly disappeared. As evening settled over Manhattan, the cafe lights reflected warmly against the windows while strangers continued walking past without realizing the extraordinary story hidden behind one quiet smile. Claire wiped the final table, switched off the last light above the counter, and stepped outside beneath a sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere across the city, a little girl was looking through her telescope with renewed wonder. A father understood that true strength often speaks in the softest voice, and countless families were better prepared because one humble waitress had chosen compassion over recognition. The world often celebrates the loudest victories, but the ones that endure the longest are usually born in quiet moments, because the people who change lives forever rarely ask anyone to remember their names.